Her father's hand closed hard around her wrist, and dragged her down, into the wagon bed, before the first shot ever cracked the afternoon open. The smoke came first. It always comes first. 6 shapes spilled down off the ridge, with the sun behind them. Black. Cut clean out of orange light. Like they were burning already. The canvas caught. A horse screamed a sound that wasn't a horse sound anymore. A will snagged on rock, and the whole world tipped sideways. The girl crawled across the floorboards. Dry dust in her mouth. Red spreading dark across her father's shirt front. An arrow buried itself in the sideboard, still shivering. The fletching was tied off wrong. All wrong. And under the blanket of one rider, the flash of a boot. Settler boots. Nobody else out here wore them. But in the smoke, nobody stops long enough to look. Her father's mouth opened. No sound left in him to make it with. Run. And she ran. Smoke first. Always smoke first. Wren Calloway smelled it before she saw it. Before the horses screamed. Before her father's hand closed hard around her wrist, and yanked her down, into the wagon bed like she weighed nothing at all. Stay low, he said. Wren. Stay low. She stayed low. The wagon lurched. Wheels catching on rock. Her father's rifle already up, already braced against his shoulder, breath coming out in short hard bursts, through his teeth. Because that was Josiah Calloway. Steady hands even, when nothing else about the world was. Except this time the world wasn't steady at all. Riders. 6 of them. Maybe 8. Coming down off the ridge, with the sun behind them, so all Wren could see were shapes. Black shapes cut out of orange light. And she thought, absurdly, in the middle of everything, they look like they're on fire. Then the first shot cracked the air open. Papa. Down. She went down. Face pressed into the floorboards. Splinters against her cheek. The taste of dust in her mouth, dry and metallic, and under it something worse. Something that would stay with her the rest of her life, though she didn't know that yet. Didn't know that this exact smell, pine smoke and gunpowder, and hot canvas, would come back to her at the strangest moments. In doorways. In firelight. In the quiet, after someone she loved walked out of a room. The wagon tipped. Not slowly. Not with warning. It simply wasn't level anymore, and then it wasn't a wagon anymore at all, it was wood, and canvas and screaming horses, and her body rolling hard, into the side rail. Pain bright and white behind her eyes. And somewhere above her, through the ringing, her father's voice. Wren. Run. Papa, no. Run. She ran. She didn't remember deciding to. Her body simply did it, legs moving before her mind caught up, and behind her the fire was already climbing the canvas top, orange tongues licking up cloth, that had covered every mile of their journey west, every trunk, every plate, every letter from her mother's people back in Ohio, that her father had never had the heart to burn. She looked back once. Only once. Her father on his knees in the dirt. Not from fear. She understood that even then, even in the chaos, because Josiah Calloway did not kneel from fear. He knelt because something had already taken the strength out of his legs. Red spreading dark across his shirt front. His rifle still in his hand, useless now, and his eyes finding hers across 30 yards of smoke, and burning wagon. Run, he mouthed. No sound left to make it with. And she did. She ran until her lungs turned to fire, and her legs turned to water, and the world went sideways and black. When she woke there was no smoke. Only the low gray light of a room, with a stove in the corner, and a woman's hand pressed cool against her forehead. There she is. Older woman. Kind eyes gone hard around the edges, the way frontier women's eyes went hard, from watching too much, and saying too little. "Lie still now. My father." The woman's face answered before her mouth did. "I'm sorry, child." Wren didn't cry. Not then. Something in her simply went quiet, the way a house goes quiet, when the last person leaves it. Because grief hadn't arrived yet. Grief was still 3 days out, riding hard to catch up to her. What arrived instead, that same afternoon, was Magistrate Ashford Grant. The outpost, 2 days later. He came into the room like a man, who already owned it. Tall. Gray at the temples in a way that looked deliberate, like he'd chosen it on purpose. A coat too fine for a town built out of raw pine boards, and dust, and boots that had never once, Wren was certain, stepped in anything they couldn't be cleaned off of. "Miss Calloway." He said it the way a man says a word he's practiced. "I am deeply, deeply sorry for your loss." She said nothing. Which he seemed to expect. Which he seemed, in fact, to prefer. "Your father was a good man," Grant went on. "A fair man. He understood something most men out here never learn. That peace is a transaction. Not a gift. A transaction. Someone always pays for it. What do you want?" Not a question. She didn't have the strength left to make it one. Grant's mouth curved. Not quite a smile. "There was a raid 3 nights ago. Apache riders. Your father's wagon wasn't the only one burned." He paused. Let the silence do some of the work for him. "The council has spent all winter trying to keep this territory from becoming a graveyard, Miss Calloway. And now the Apache leadership has offered terms. A binding of houses. A marriage." The word landed strange in the room. Too large for it. "A marriage," she repeated. "To their war leader. A man named Tocho." Grant said the name carefully, like it cost him something to say it right. "In exchange, the raids stop. The winter passes without more graves being dug. Without more girls losing their fathers on empty roads." Something cold moved through her chest. "You want to give me away." "I want to keep you alive," Grant said. "Along with a great many other people you've never met." Behind him, near the door, a man in a worn cavalry coat shifted his weight. Older. Sun-cracked face. He hadn't spoken yet. But Wren caught his eyes, and there was something in them that didn't match Grant's smooth certainty at all. "Magistrate." The man's voice was quiet. "There's other ways to make peace than trading off a girl 3 days orphaned. Mr. Cobb." Grant didn't turn around. "Your objection is noted. As it was noted yesterday. And the day before. Noting it isn't the same as hearing it. I've heard it fine." Now Grant did turn, and the smile was gone entirely. "Do you have gold to buy off 6 raiding parties, Silas? Do you have a company of soldiers I don't know about?" Cobb said nothing. Because he didn't. Which they both understood. Which was, Wren would come to realize, exactly the kind of silence Grant built his whole life around. The silence of men, who had no better answer, and hated him for it. "I don't want this," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. "No one wants it." Grant, gentle now. Terribly, terribly gentle. "That's the nature of sacrifice, Miss Calloway. Don't fight it. You're young. You'll survive. Survive." The word would sit in her like a stone for months. She met Silas Cobb properly, that night, out behind the trading post, where the horses were kept, where she'd gone, because she couldn't stand the walls of that room a moment longer. "Your father saved my life once." No introduction. Like he'd been carrying the sentence around a while, waiting for somewhere to set it down. Down near the Gila, 6 years back. A man doesn't forget that. Then stop this. Can't. His jaw worked. Not with what I've got. Grant's got the counsel. Grant's got the ear of the fort commander. All I've got is a rifle, and a bad feeling. A bad feeling about what? Cobb looked at her a long moment. Weighing something. About a magistrate who's awful eager to trade a dead man's daughter for peace, he said finally, when nobody's asked why, that dead man's wagon burned in the first place. Wren's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm not saying anything. He shook his head. Backed off from it the way a man backs off a ledge. Not yet. Not till I know more. You just, he hesitated. You watch yourself out there, Miss Calloway. Whatever you find. You watch yourself. She didn't understand him. Not that night. She would. The river crossing, 3 days later. They gave her a plain gray dress at the outpost, since her own had burned, with everything else that mattered. Gave her a horse she didn't know how to ride well, and a guide, who spoke maybe 9 words the whole journey out, and mile by mile the land changed under her. Scrub gave way to canyon. Canyon gave way to a valley green, with cottonwoods along a river, that caught the last light like something poured, from a bottle. She didn't cry on that ride. Which surprised her some. She'd cried plenty in the days before. Cried until there was nothing left, or so she'd thought. But now there was only a strange flat stillness. A held breath that wouldn't let itself out. Until the smoke of the village came into view over the tree line. And her stomach dropped like the floor had gone out from under her. Because this was it. This was the last mile of her old life. Somewhere on the other side of that smoke was a man she'd never met, who now owned her, by every law her people understood, and there was nothing, nothing at all, she could do about it. So she rode in, with her chin up, and her hands shaking in her lap, and told herself, over and over, the same 3 words her father used to say, when the storms came hard across the plains. You are steady. You are steady. She was not steady. Not even a little. But she said it anyway, all the way to the lodge, where the elders were waiting. The lodge, that night. She didn't remember the ceremony. Not really. A blur of faces. A blanket over her shoulders. Words in a language she didn't understand, and one elder's hand pressing something cool and smooth into her palm, before pulling away again. What she remembered was after. The flap of hide falling shut behind the last of them. The fire low and orange in the pit. And silence, the particular silence of a room that has just emptied itself of every familiar thing. She sat on the edge of the bed, if it could be called that. Soft pelts laid over woven mats, and her hands were still shaking, still brown with road dust, still cracked from 3 days of rains. She didn't wipe her eyes. Because what was the point? These weren't the kind of tears that stopped for wiping. Her shoes were still on. Dusty. Frayed at the seams. The leather gone stiff, as bark from river crossings, and rock, and she didn't dare take them off. Didn't dare move at all, in fact, like stillness itself might keep something worse from happening. A gift, she thought. No. A bargain. Don't fight it, Grant had said. You're young. You'll survive. But survive didn't mean live. She understood that now, sitting alone in a stranger's lodge 3 days, after burying her father in ground that still smelled like smoke. And then the flap moved. Hushed. The way falling snow is hushed. He stepped in. Tocho was not what she'd built in her head on the ride out. She'd built something out of fear. Some hulking, scarred thing, cruelty behind the eyes. What stood in the doorway instead was a man not much older than herself. Tall. Broad through the shoulders. Black hair bound at the neck, a strip of red leather across his brow, and eyes that found her face, and stayed there. Not her body. Her face. Which somehow made it harder to breathe than if he'd looked anywhere else. "I'm sorry," she heard herself say. The words tumbling out, before she could stop them. "I know I'm not what you wanted. I know that. I'm not pretty, I know I'm not." He didn't move. Didn't speak. Which frightened her more than shouting would have. Because in her experience, silence was where the worst things lived. Then he crossed the room. She flinched. Braced for hands at her wrist, her waist, the things she'd been warned about in whispers by women at the outpost who'd never once been kind to her, but had been very free, with their fears. Instead he dropped to one knee. Before her. Like it was the simplest, most natural thing a man could do. And without a word, he reached for the laces of her right shoe. She went rigid. Watched, disbelieving, as his fingers worked the hardened knots loose, knots she'd tied herself 3 mornings ago at an outpost, that already felt like a different lifetime. The leather came away, with a dry sound, almost a sigh, and her foot beneath it was raw. Blistered. Filthy from the road. He didn't flinch from it. He reached for a cloth. Dipped it in a bowl of water set beside the bed. And began, one slow stroke at a time, to wash her foot in the firelight. He didn't look up. Didn't ask for thanks. Didn't seem to want any. Just kept his head bowed. His touch careful. Reverent, almost, in a way she had no name for yet. When he finished he set the cloth aside. Rose. Turned to the fire, and fed it a fresh piece of wood, giving her the small distance of the room like a gift. Wren stared down at the wet print her foot had left on the earth floor. No one had ever washed her feet before. No one had ever, not once in 19 years, made her feel like something worth kneeling for. She didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. The fire burned down to coals, and the wind outside settled, into a low steady hum, and beside her, not touching her blanket, but close enough, that she could hear the slow even rhythm of his breathing, Tocho lay still, as high ground. He didn't try to speak. Didn't try to touch her. He simply existed there. Grounded. Unmoved. And somewhere in the small hours of that long night, without deciding to, Wren found herself listening to his breathing the way a person listens to rain. Not with fear anymore. With something closer to comfort. The village, the next morning. He was gone before she woke. No note, because there was no way to leave one. No explanation. Just the flap falling shut behind him, soft as a held breath, and Wren left alone in a lodge, that wasn't hers, yet and might never be. She sat for hours. Because she didn't know, if she was meant to follow. Didn't know if there were rules here, unspoken ones, the kind that could get a person in trouble simply by not knowing them. Then the flap moved again. A girl came in. Close to Wren's own age. Soft brown eyes, a braid down her back, and in her arms a folded garment of soft deerskin. She held it out. Motioned, gently, toward the plain gray dress Wren still wore, the last thing, that connected her to, who she used to be. "Do I have to wear this?" Wren asked. Barely above a whisper. The girl only smiled. A small smile. Set the deerskin down and left without answering. Which was its own kind of answer. Wren changed. Alone. And something about shedding, that gray dress, dust-streaked, singed at the hem, where sparks had caught it 3 nights before, felt like shedding something rotted through. Something she hadn't realized she'd still been carrying. Later that girl came back, with food, and later still Wren would learn her name, Sora, but that first day there were no names yet. Only glances. Only small kindnesses offered, without translation, because the truest kindnesses, Wren was starting to understand, never needed one. That afternoon Tocho returned. She hadn't eaten. Hadn't moved much beyond the doorway and back. But she'd worn the deerskin, finally, and something in his face shifted when he saw her in it. Not a smile. Something quieter than that. He carried a wooden bowl. Steam curling off beans, and squash and something green, and fragrant she didn't have a name for. He offered it without a word. Sat across from her, while she ate, and she could hardly swallow under the weight of his watching, not judgment, she realized slowly. Something more like study. Like a man trying to learn a language, with no dictionary at all. Finally she broke the silence herself. You don't want me here. Do you? Her voice trembled. This wasn't your choice. He said nothing. But this time his eyes didn't look away. He reached into the leather pouch at his belt. Drew out something small, a string of carved stones, smoothed by years of handling, warm from being carried against his body. He set it in her palm. My sister wore this, he said. First words. Low. Deep, like wind moving through canyon rock. Before her wedding. Wren looked down at the stones. Simple patterns painted along each one, worn soft at the edges. She died last winter, Tocho said. Why give it to me? Wren asked. You don't even know me. He was quiet a long moment. Not yet, he said. That was all. He rose. Stepped out into the fading light, and left her holding the necklace in a hand that no longer felt entirely her own. That night she placed it on the bed between them. And for the first time, since the fire took her father from her, she slept. The river, 3 mornings later. She woke to the sound of women's voices outside the lodge. Soft. Purposeful. Carrying bundles of red cloth, and feathers, and green sprigs of something, that smelled like the whole valley had bloomed at once. Tocho was nowhere in sight. Sora came for her instead. Not with clothing this time. With purpose in her step, and Wren followed, without knowing why, because some part of her had already learned, that following Sora meant something worth learning waited on the other side. They walked through the village. Past low bark-roofed shelters, and smoking cook fires, past elders whose faces were creased like old bark themselves, past children who peered out, from behind woven baskets, with open curiosity. Wren felt every eye on her the whole way, and by the time they reached the clearing by the river, her hands had gone cold despite the warm morning sun. The women circled her there. None spoke her language. None needed to. One held out a shallow bowl, water inside it fragrant, with something green and clean. Motioned for her to wash her face. Another combed the tangles, from her hair, with fingers so gentle Wren nearly wept, from the feel of it alone. A third painted a careful line of red clay, and oil down the part of her hair. Wren didn't understand. Not until the cloth was brought forward, soft crimson, stitched through with bone-colored thread, unfolded before her like something sacred. A dress. Not for labor. Not for sleep. A wedding dress. Why, she stammered. Why are you dressing me like this? Only looks answered her. Only hands, guiding the fabric, over her shoulders, and slowly, slowly, it dawned on her. This was theirs. Not Grant's ceremony of ink, and signatures traded in some dim council room 100 miles east. Not a magistrate's arithmetic of peace bought cheap, with a dead man's daughter. This was for them. For her. For Tocho. She was being welcomed. Not handed over. Something that had stayed frozen in her chest, since the wagon tipped, into fire broke loose all at once, and by the time they led her back, through the village, her cheeks were wet, with tears that, for the first time in days, didn't feel entirely like grief. At the lodge, Tocho waited. Freshly washed. New buckskin fitted close against his frame, his hair bound back, with red string, and when he saw her he didn't stare. Didn't smirk. Only bowed his head once, respectfully, as if he understood exactly how heavy this moment sat on her. Wombly, she would learn his name, that day, spoken by an elder beside him, with careful reverence, stepped forward. Old. Face carved deep by decades of sun and wind. He spoke words in a slow rhythm she couldn't follow, then set a carved wooden staff on the ground between them. She didn't need the words translated. Step across, and you are both part of this now. Her bare feet crossed the line. Her hands trembled, and Tocho took them, not tightly, not with any claim in it, only enough that she didn't feel alone standing there in front of the whole gathered village. A murmur rose when the elder finished. Soft. Approving. And then, once more, they were left alone. That night Tocho knelt a second time. Untied the new ceremonial sandals, from her feet, brushed the dust of the day's long walk, from her ankles, with the same careful reverence, as before, and Wren closed her eyes. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel ugly. The burned paper, 5 days later. It was Silas Cobb who brought the trunk. He rode in on a gray mare, with a wooden crate lashed behind the saddle, and word went, through the village, before he'd even dismounted, the settler scout, come with what remained of the burned wagon. What could be salvaged? What the fire, in its hunger, had left behind. Wren met him at the edge of the camp. Her hands already shaking, before she'd seen a single thing inside that crate. There isn't much. Cobb, careful. Like a man handing someone a wound instead of a gift. Some tools. A few of your mother's things, wrapped up good, survived somehow. And this. He held out a small tin box, blackened at the corners, the latch half melted shut. Wren's father had kept it locked in the wagon's false bottom. She'd forgotten it existed, until the moment she saw it. Where did you find this? Buried under what was left of the seat boards. Fire didn't get all the way, through the tin. Cobb's jaw tightened. I looked inside. Figured you'd want to know before you did. And? He didn't answer right away. Which told her more than words would have. She pried the latch open herself, fingers clumsy, and inside, half-burned, edges curled black, but legible in places, was a single folded document. A land survey. Her father's handwriting along one margin, notes in his careful hand about boundary markers, and mineral rights. And at the bottom corner, pressed into red wax gone brittle, with heat, a seal. She knew that seal. She'd seen it stamped, onto every notice Magistrate Grant had ever posted outside the trading post. The same seal, that had sat on the desk in the room, where he'd told her, so gently, so terribly gently, that her father was a good man, and peace was a transaction, and someone always pays for it. That's Grant's mark. Her voice came out strange to her own ears. Flat. Far away. I know. Why would my father have a document, with Grant's seal on it? Burned. Hidden. In a locked box under the wagon seat. Cobb didn't answer that either. Because he didn't have to. Because they were both already circling the same terrible thought, the one neither of them wanted to be first to say out loud. Those riders. Wren, slow. The ones who burned us out. You said, back at the outpost, you said nobody'd asked why my father's wagon burned in the first place. I did say that. Say it now. Cobb glanced back over his shoulder. At the empty road behind him. At the long miles between this valley, and the fort, where men like Grant slept easy in beds, with clean sheets. Arrows they used. Quiet. I looked at 2 of them, pulled from the wagon frame, before the fire took the rest. Fletching was wrong. Apache work doesn't tie off that way. Never has, not in 6 years I've ridden this territory. He paused. And one of the men I glimpsed, through the smoke, before I lost my nerve, and ran for cover same, as everyone, he was wearing boots. settler boots. Under a blanket meant to look like something else. The ground seemed to tilt beneath Wren's feet. Someone wanted it to look like an Apache raid. I can't prove that. Not yet. Not to a magistrate, who controls the only court for 200 miles. But you believe it. His silence was answer enough. Wren looked down at the burned document in her hands. At her father's careful notes about boundary lines, and mineral claims, and at the red wax seal, that didn't belong anywhere near a dead man's private papers, unless something was very wrong indeed. He was killed for this. Not a question anymore. Wasn't he? Not by the Apache at all. By someone who wanted this land, and needed my father gone to get it, and needed a war on top of it to cover his tracks. Wren. Cobb's voice was low. Urgent. You keep this quiet. You hear me? Whoever did this, they're not finished. Not with a war, that never quite starts, and never quite stops either, that serves someone a lot better than peace does. She folded the burned paper carefully. Held it against her chest like something that might still catch fire, if she wasn't careful with it. I have to tell Tocho. Maybe you do. Cobb swung back up, into his saddle, weary in a way that had nothing to do with the ride. Just watch who else hears it first. A man who'd burn a wagon to steal a valley won't think twice about burning down anything standing in his way after. He rode out before dusk. Left her standing at the edge of the village, with a tin box in her hands, and a fear in her chest that hadn't been there that morning. The fire pit, that night. She found Tocho outside their lodge, carving something into a strip of pale bark by firelight, unhurried, his focus total. I need to show you something, she said. He looked up. Set the bark aside, without a word, and something in his stillness told her he already sensed the weight of what she carried. She laid the burned document between them. Watched his eyes move, over the seal at the corner. Watched something harden behind them, that she hadn't seen there before, not at her, never at her, but at the mark itself, like he recognized a shape of danger long before he understood its edges. This is the Magistrate's seal, he said. You know it. I know it. His jaw set. It is on every paper his men have brought to Wombley this past year. Every offer of land. Every warning. My father had this. Hidden. Burned along with everything else. Tocho was quiet a long moment. The fire cracked between them, throwing shifting light across his face. Your father was not killed by my people, he said. Not a question. No. Her voice cracked on the word. I don't think he was. I know he wasn't. Something in the way he said it, flat, certain, like a fact long since settled in him, stopped her cold. What do you mean, you know? Tocho set the strip of bark down entirely now. Met her eyes across the fire, and for the first time, since the flap of that first lodge had closed behind the elders, he looked like a man about to hand her something heavier than she was ready for. There is a thing I have not told you, he said. Because I did not know how, and because the telling of it needed to wait, until you trusted me enough to hear it right. Wren's heart beat hard against her ribs. Tell me now. Your father. His voice roughened. 2 winters passed, before you came west, with him, he traveled through this valley alone. Trading. He was the only settler who dealt with my people honestly. Weighed goods fair. Never watered his whiskey, never cheated an old woman on a blanket trade the way the others did. I didn't know that. He did more than trade fair. His eyes didn't leave hers. My sister was sick that winter. Fever the healers could not break. Your father rode 2 days to the fort, and back with medicine he paid for, from his own pocket, though he owed my people nothing at all. Wren's breath caught somewhere in her chest. She still died. Quietly. The medicine came too late. But I did not forget what your father did. None of us did. That's why," her voice shook. "That's why you asked for me. Isn't it? When Grant came with his terms. You knew my name, before he ever said it. I asked Wombly to request the trade be made, with Josiah Calloway's daughter," Tocho said. Steady. Grave. "Not as payment. Not as punishment for a raid my people did not commit. I asked because I did not trust what Grant intended for you otherwise, once he had finished using your father's death to buy his peace. I asked because I believed, I still believe, that a man like Grant does not simply stop taking once he has started." The fire popped. Somewhere beyond the lodges a dog barked twice, and went quiet. Wren sat very still, turning it all over. Every hour since the wagon burned, rearranging itself in her mind, into a new shape entirely. "This was never a punishment," she said slowly. "This marriage. It was never meant to hurt me. No." His voice dropped lower still. "It was meant to keep you breathing. Long enough for the truth about your father's death to find its way into daylight. Long enough that whoever did this, whoever wanted his land, and needed a war to cover the theft of it, could not simply finish what they started, with you, once they saw you were no longer alone." Wren looked down at the burned document between them. At her father's handwriting, steady even in its last recorded lines. At the red wax seal, that had followed her, from a burning wagon to a magistrate's smooth apologies to this fire, this valley, this man who had knelt to wash her feet on the worst night of her life, and asked for nothing in return. "Grant is still out there," she said. "Still moving. Still building whatever this is toward something. Yes. And he doesn't know that we know." Tocho's eyes held hers across the flames. Something unwavering in them, something that hadn't faltered once, since the night she'd arrived at this village, with her hands full of fear, and nothing else. "No," he said. "He does not know at all. Not yet." The fire burned low between them, and somewhere out past the tree line the whole dark shape of the territory lay quiet under the stars, the fort, the outpost, the magistrate's fine coat, and finer lies, all of it waiting, unaware, for the moment a settler's orphaned daughter, and an Apache war leader's grief would meet in the middle of a burned piece of paper, and refuse, both of them, to look away. Wren folded her father's document with careful hands. Pressed it flat against her chest the way she might once have pressed a photograph, or a letter, or anything else, that proved a person had lived, and mattered and left something behind worth fighting for. "Then we don't look away," she said. Tocho nodded once. Slow. Certain. "No," he said. "We do not." Above them the first hard stars of autumn had come out, over the ridge line, cold and bright, and far away, the same stars, that had watched a wagon burn 9 days, before and would watch, in the long winter still to come, everything that followed after. Snow came early that year. First just a dusting on the ridge line. Then more. Until the whole valley wore white like something scrubbed clean, and Wren Calloway woke every morning to the sound of her own breath fogging the cold air above her blankets, and thought, every single time, the same small thought. "I am still here." Which surprised her still. Weeks in and it still surprised her. Because grief doesn't leave all at once. Nobody tells you that. They tell you it fades. Nobody tells you it just changes shape, gets smaller, gets quieter, tucks itself into corners of your day and waits. A smell of wood smoke. A man's low voice at dusk. Her father's handwriting, folded and burned at the edges, still hidden beneath the furs, where she slept. She carried it. Every day. Carried it the way she carried water, from the river, heavy, necessary, something you stopped noticing the weight of only, because you had no choice. Sora found her most mornings at the fire pit. "You are up before the sun again." Not really a question. More an accusation, gentle, the kind friends made. Couldn't sleep. You never sleep. I sleep some. Some is not sleep. Sora dropped down beside her, breath clouding white. Helona says a woman who does not sleep is a woman still fighting a war nobody else can see. Wren almost smiled. Almost. Maybe I am. Then stop. Sora bumped her shoulder. Winter is long enough, without you fighting it too. The women's circle had become the one steady thing. Every few days, weather allowing, they gathered under the bare cottonwood at the eastern edge of camp, Helona at the center like a stone around, which a river had learned to bend, hands never idle, voice never raised. Wren had learned to spin thread there. Learned to grind dried herbs into paste for the healers. Learned, mostly, to sit in silence, and let it be enough. Because that was the thing nobody back east had ever taught her. That silence could be a kindness. That you could sit beside someone for an hour, and say nothing at all, and still walk away less alone than, when you sat down. Your hands are steadier. Helona, one morning, not looking up, from her own work. Since the beginning. I've had practice. No. Helona's eyes lifted then. Sharp. Old. Steadier here. She touched 2 fingers to her own chest. Not the hands. The rest of you. Wren didn't answer that. Couldn't, really. Because how do you explain to a woman, who watched you arrive broken, that you don't fully recognize the person sitting in the snow beside her now? He asked for you, Helona said instead. Changing course the way she always did, sideways, like a hawk riding wind instead of fighting it. Before the wedding trade was made. Did he tell you that? He told me. Do you understand why? His sister, Wren said quietly. My father helped her. Once. That is the reason he gave the counsel. Helona's needle didn't slow. It was not the only reason. Wren's chest tightened. What was the other one? But Helona only smiled, small, knowing, infuriating, and went back to her thread, and Wren understood she would get nothing further. Not that day. Helona doled out truth the way winter doled out sunlight. In careful, rationed pieces. Never more than the day could hold. The Ridge Trail, that same week. Silas Cobb came at dusk. Alone. No crate this time, no reason anyone could see, and that alone was enough to put Wren's stomach in a knot, before he'd even swung down off his horse. You shouldn't be riding out here in this weather, she said. Neither should the things I've been hearing. Cobb didn't smile. Didn't do much of anything except glance back, over his shoulder, once, at the empty trail behind him. Walk with me a minute. Away from the lodges. They walked. Snow crunching underfoot. Overhead the sky had gone, that deep bruised color it went right, before full dark, and Wren pulled her shawl tighter, and waited, because she'd learned by now, that Cobb said things in his own time, and pushing him only slowed him down. There's talk at the fort. Finally. About mineral rights. Your father's land, the whole valley really, all the way to the river bend, sits over something. Copper, maybe silver. Survey crew came, through back in the fall, quiet-like, before your father ever burned in that wagon. You think that's why? I think a man doesn't burn a wagon over pride. Cobb's jaw was tight. He burns it over money. And Grant's been buying up land claims all winter under other men's names. Every one of them bordering your father's original grant. Wren's breath came shallow. He's building something. He's building a fence around this whole valley, one paper at a time, and he needs 2 things to finish it. Cobb held up a finger. Your father's land, which passes to you now, since you're the only Calloway left, that anybody knows of. And the second thing? War. Flat. No softening at all. Long as there's peace out here, Congress won't touch this land, won't run a rail spur through it, won't send the kind of money and men that make a mining claim worth a damn. But a war. He shook his head slow. A war brings soldiers. Soldiers bring forts. Forts bring towns. And towns sit on whoever's land is left standing when the shooting stops. The cold seemed to reach all the way into Wren's bones then. Deeper than the weather alone could put it. He needs this peace to fail. I believe he does. Then everything he told me. About sacrifice. About keeping people alive. Her voice shook. It was never about peace at all. Might have started that way, once. Cobb's eyes were tired in the failing light. Men like Grant don't always start out rotten. Sometimes the money just finds the rot already waiting in them, and waters it good. He looked at her, level. Point is. You watch. Anything strange happens out here, any raid, any trouble, anything at all, that looks like it's meant to break this piece apart, you ask who profits, before you ask who's guilty. Because those two questions don't always share an answer. He mounted up, before full dark took the trail. Left her standing alone in the snow, with that sentence sitting cold in her chest, and somewhere behind her, though she didn't know it yet, somewhere in the dark beyond the tree line, someone had been listening. The lodge, later that night. She told Tocho everything. Word for word, as close as she could manage, and watched his face go still, and hard in the firelight in a way she was coming to recognize. Copper, he said. Like the word tasted foul. Or silver. Cobb wasn't certain. It does not matter which. His hands had gone motionless, over the length of cordage he'd been braiding. It only matters, that men like Grant would burn a family alive, over rock in the ground. He needs war to finish it, Wren said. That's what frightens me most. Not what he's already done. What he still means to do. Tocho was quiet a long moment. Then we do not give him one, he said finally. How do you stop a man from making a war happen, if he's determined enough to make it happen anyway? I do not know yet. His eyes found hers, level even in uncertainty. But I know we do not stop it by fear. Fear is the soil he plants in. Take that away, and even his best seed does not grow. She wanted to believe him. Some nights, that winter, she almost did. The council fire, 2 weeks later. Mingan she'd noticed before. Hard not to. Younger than Tocho by a few years, quick-eyed, quicker-tempered, and from the very first week he'd made no effort to hide what he thought of a settler girl sitting inside lodges that weren't hers to sit in. But it was at the council fire, with half the village gathered, and the cold pressing close on all sides, that he finally said it out loud. How long? Mingan, not to Wren, to the fire, to the gathered elders, though everyone understood exactly who the words were aimed at. How long do we let a settler's daughter walk among us, before we ask what she carries back to them, in exchange? Silence. The bad kind. The kind that waits to see which way a room will break. She carries nothing back. Tocho, quiet, controlled, though Wren could see the tension along his jaw. She has given us more truth in 1 winter than the magistrate has given in 10 years of talk. Truth. Mingan's mouth twisted. Or a story convenient enough, that we stop watching our own borders, while we listen to it. You question her honesty. I question why we trade our safety for a settler girl's grief. Mingan turned then, eyes hard on Wren across the flames. Tell me. Truly. If your magistrate Grant rode into this valley tomorrow, and offered you your old life back, your people, your land, your name restored, would you take it? The fire cracked between them. Every eye in the circle came to rest on her. Wren's heart slammed once, hard, against her ribs. Because it was a fair question. That was the terrible part. It was the one question she hadn't let herself sit with too long, out of fear of what answer might come up out of the dark, if she did. I don't know. Honest, because anything else would have shattered the moment it left her mouth. I don't know what I'd do. I only know what I'm doing now. And what I'm doing now is trying to stop a man from burning this whole valley down for rock in the ground. Mingan's eyes narrowed. Pretty words. They're the only kind I've got. Wombly raised a hand then. Old. Weathered. The gesture alone enough to still the fire's crackle, into something like held breath. Enough, the old man said. Mingan. Your caution is not unwelcome. But your accusation is unearned. We will watch. We will not accuse without cause. Mingan said nothing further. Only rose. Only walked out past the circle, into the dark, and Wren watched him go, with a feeling settling low, and cold in her stomach, that had nothing to do with the winter air at all. The trading post, the next day. He rode out before first light. Nobody remarked on it. Mingan came and went, as he pleased, hunted alone often, and a hunting trip in hard winter raised no eyebrows on its own. Except this wasn't a hunting trip. Which Wren only learned much later, piece by piece, the way most terrible truths arrive, sideways, incomplete, and always too late to stop what they describe. Mingan rode 2 days east. To the trading post, that sat just inside settler territory, where Magistrate Grant kept rooms above the store, and met with men who preferred their business done quiet. You're late, Grant said, when Mingan finally stepped through the back door, snow still melting off his shoulders. The trail was hard. The trail is always hard. That's rather the point of choosing it. Grant didn't rise from behind his desk. Didn't offer a chair. What news? She knows about the land claims. Mingan's jaw was tight. The settler girl. She has your seal from a burned document. Cobb has been feeding her pieces. Grant's face didn't change. Not outwardly. But something behind his eyes went very still, the way a lake goes still right, before ice takes it whole. How much does she know? Enough to be dangerous. Not enough, yet, to prove anything. Yet. Grant turned that word over like a coin. And the war leader? Tocho. What does he believe? He believes her. Of course he does. Grant almost smiled. Men in love believe whatever the woman in front of them tells them to. It's their one reliable weakness. Mingan said nothing to that. Something in his face flickered though, the smallest crack, quickly hidden, though Grant caught it all the same. Because Grant made a study of exactly that kind of crack. It was, in fact, his entire trade. You do not approve of the marriage, Grant said. Almost gentle. I do not approve of a stranger sitting inside our council fires. No. Grant's eyes glittered. You do not approve of Tocho having what you wanted for yourself, long before any settler girl ever crossed this valley. Am I wrong? Mingan's silence answered plainly enough. I thought not. Grant finally rose. Circled the desk slow, a man enjoying the shape of a plan finally coming together. Here is what I require of you, Mingan. Nothing more than watching, for now. Watch the war leader. Watch the girl. And when the time comes, and it will come, sooner than either of them expects, I will need someone inside that village willing to make sure blame lands exactly where I need it to land. And in return? In return you get your war leader discredited. Removed. Perhaps exiled, perhaps worse, depending how events unfold. Grant's smile widened, thin and cold. And whoever leads this village, after him will owe his position, in no small part, to a man who was wise enough to see trouble coming, before anyone else did. Mingan's eyes hardened. Something ugly and hungry moving behind them. You're offering me his place. I'm offering you the chance to earn it, Grant said. Whether you take that chance is entirely your own affair. Outside, the wind picked up, driving snow hard against the shuttered windows, and neither man in that room noticed, or cared, that 200 miles west, in a valley they both meant to unmake, a girl who trusted too easily, and a war leader, who loved too plainly were about to pay the price for both. The fort, that same day. There was a third conversation that afternoon. One neither Mingan nor Grant witnessed. One that would matter more than either of them yet understood. A boy. 12, maybe 13. Thin the way boys got thin, when meals came irregular, and worry ran constant, and he stood in the yard behind the fort supply house, with a folded scrap of paper clutched, so tight in his fist the edges had gone soft with sweat. You Silas Cobb? The boy asked. Voice cracking on the second word. I am. Man paid me 2 bits to find you. Said you'd know what to do with this. The boy thrust the paper forward like it burned him to hold it. Said to tell you, tell whoever needs telling, that Asa Calloway sends it. Cobb went very still. Asa Calloway is dead, son. Burned in a wagon fire 2 months back, along with his father. Man who gave me this weren't dead, the boy said. Weren't looking too well, mind. But weren't dead. Cobb's hands shook, just slightly, as he unfolded the paper. A few lines only. Cramped, hurried handwriting, the kind of a person writing in poor light, with someone watching, over their shoulder. Cobb, alive. Being held at Grant's mining camp north of the fort. Don't tell my sister till you know how to get me out safe. He'll use me against her, if he learns she knows. See, Cobb read it twice. Folded it slow. Looked up at the boy, with an expression the boy would remember, he'd say later, for the rest of his life, something between hope and dread, wearing the same face at once. Who gave you this? Fella at the mining camp. Snuck it to me, while the guards weren't looking. Said his name was Asa. Said, the boy hesitated. Said tell the man with the gray mare, that his sister's the only family he's got left, and he'd rather die keeping that secret than see her walk into Grant's hands trying to save him. Cobb pressed a coin into the boy's palm. More than 2 bits. Enough to buy silence and gratitude both. You tell anyone about this, Cobb said, low, and it isn't Grant you'll need to worry about. The boy nodded fast. Ran. And Silas Cobb stood alone in the yard, with a dead man's living son folded up in his coat pocket, and no earthly idea, not yet, how in God's name he was going to carry news like that through hard winter, without getting the girl he carried it to killed in the process. The North Trail, 4 days later. Tocho left before dawn. West Trail, he'd told her. 2 days. He was gone 5. Wren counted every one of them. Counted the way a person counts things they've decided not to think about too directly, because thinking about it directly only made the waiting worse. By the 4th night the wind had turned hard and mean, driving down off the ridge in long howling gusts that rattled the lodge poles and buried the trail under drift after drift of fresh snow, and Wren sat by a fire that kept burning too low, too fast, like even the flame sensed something wrong, and couldn't settle. He is late, she said. To Helona, who had come to sit with her that night, without being asked. He is. You're not worried. I did not say that. Helona's eyes were steady on the flames. I said he is late. Worry and knowing are not the same thing, child. A woman can hold both at once, if she is patient enough to let them sit apart. Wren wasn't patient. Not that night. When the last coal finally burned down past midnight, she did something she hadn't done since the night of the fire that took her father. She went outside, alone, into weather no sane person would choose, and started walking toward the tree line, without any plan beyond needing, desperately, to be moving instead of waiting. The cold hit her like a wall. Her boots crunched frost. Her breath tore ragged and white ahead of her, and somewhere past the edge of the clearing the whole forest stood black and silent, holding whatever secret it meant to hold about whether the man she'd married was alive or dead out there in it. "You said you'd come back," she whispered, into wind that swallowed the words whole. "You said." Then. Hoofbeats. Faint. Not far. She stopped dead. Heart hammering so hard it hurt. And through the dark, through snow coming sideways now, a shape came into view, large, slow, unmistakably familiar, and Wren's legs nearly gave out, from something that wasn't relief exactly, was bigger than relief, didn't have a proper name at all. Tocho. Snow-dusted. Braid half come loose from its binding. A dark cut along his temple, that had bled, and dried and bled again, and yet upright. Alive. Moving under his own strength, as he swung down off the horse. She didn't run to him. Waited instead. Watched him cross the last stretch of snow himself, slow and steady despite whatever pain he carried, because some part of her understood he needed to close that distance on his own terms. "You're late," she said. Voice cracking despite every effort to hold it steady. "Yes." "You're bleeding." "Yes." "Are you hurt?" "Only in places that matter least." He reached up. Brushed a strand of frozen hair back from her cheek, with fingers gone rough and cold. "I had to find something first." He reached into the small pack tied at his belt. Drew out a bundle wrapped tight in oiled hide, and unwrapped it slow, reverent, the way a man unwraps something he'd risked more than he was willing to say to bring home. Inside, a pair of soft deerskin shoes. Hand-stitched. Beaded sunbursts worked carefully across each toe. Wren's breath caught. "You made these." "Not me. My sister's sister, one of the last things she stitched, before winter took her too." His voice roughened. "I asked her to make them for a woman, who walks beside me. Not behind." He dropped to one knee. "Not with ceremony. With care." Lifted her foot, worked the worn boot free, and beneath it her sock had gone damp through, frayed thin at the heel, from weeks of hard walking, and he didn't so much as flinch at the sight of it. Simply peeled it away. Fitted the new shoe gentle around her foot. Then the other. "You're barefoot," she said. Staring at his own feet, wrapped only in thin worn moccasins already soaked through. "In this. I walked here, with these tucked inside my coat," he said simply. "Against my chest, to keep the hide dry. You needed them more than I needed dry boots." Something broke open in her chest. Warm. Terrifying. "Tocho. I see you, Wren." He rose. Towering again, but gentler now, somehow, than she'd ever seen him. "As you are. And you are not a burden. You are not shame. You are not," his voice caught, just slightly, on the next word. "You are not ugly. You never were. You are the woman I would walk barefoot, through snow for. Twice, if you asked it of me." She laughed. A sound half sob, half something brighter. "You didn't have to say that. I know." His eyes held hers, level even through exhaustion. "I wanted to." She stepped closer, until the new shoe's toes touched the worn edge of his moccasins. "Then let's go inside," she said. "Before that cut on your head decides to finish what the trail started." He almost smiled. Almost. And as they walked back together toward the sleeping village, her hand found his in the dark, cold fingers lacing through his colder ones, and this one time, out of all the times, that terrible winter would test her, she let herself believe, fully, that whatever waited ahead, they'd face it standing side by side. She was wrong about how soon that test would come. The Cobb homestead, 2 days later. Silas Cobb rode in at midday. Which was wrong, all on its own. Cobb never rode in at midday, always preferred dusk, the cover of failing light. And the look on his face, when Wren met him at the edge of camp, told her, before a single word passed between them, that whatever he carried this time was heavier than burned paper. "Walk with me," he said. Same as before. Except this time his hands weren't steady at all. "Silas. What's happened?" He didn't answer, until they'd put real distance between themselves and the nearest lodge. "I need you to sit down for this." "I'm not going to sit down in the snow, Silas, just tell me. Your brother's alive." The words hit her like a physical blow. Like the ground had opened beneath her feet the exact same way it had the day the wagon burned. "That's not, Asa died. Asa died in the fire, they told me, they said there was nothing left to." "They lied to you." Cobb's jaw was tight, his eyes wet at the corners, from more than just the cold. "Or they were lied to themselves, I don't rightly know which. But I've had a note in my coat pocket 4 days now, in your brother's own hand, carried by a boy, who swears on his own mother he watched Asa write it." 4 days. Wren's eyes narrowed even through her shock. "You've known 4 days. I had to be sure." Cobb's voice was rough. "Sure it wasn't Grant's own trap, dangled to see, if I'd come running straight to you, with it, and lead his men right to whatever proof we're gathering. I sent the boy back, with a question only Asa would know the answer to. Waited on him to return, before I trusted a word of it." He shook his head, grim. "I'm sorry for the wait, Wren. I'd rather bring you a truth I'd tested than a hope that turns out to be a knife." Wren's knees actually did give out then. Cobb caught her elbow. Held her up. "Where," she managed. "Where is he?" "Grant's mining camp. Half a day's hard ride north, past the ridge trail, in the rock country nobody settles, because the ground's no good for anything but digging." Cobb's voice dropped lower still. "He's alive, Wren, but he's a prisoner there, not a guest. Grant's been holding him, most likely, since the day of the fire." "Why? Why would Grant keep him alive at all, if he was willing to kill our father?" "Because a hostage is worth more breathing than buried." Cobb's eyes were hard now. Furious, in the quiet controlled way of a man who'd learned long ago, that rage announced too loud only got a person killed. "Grant needs leverage. Against you. Against whatever you might do, with what you've learned about that land scheme. Your brother's the leash he's kept in his back pocket this whole time, in case you ever pulled too hard against the rest of it." Wren pressed both hands over her mouth. Because if she didn't, she was certain the sound that wanted to come out of her would be heard clean across the valley. "I have to go to him." "No." Cobb's grip on her arm tightened. "That is exactly what Asa begged me not to let you do. Wren, listen to me. If Grant learns you know he's alive, your brother stops being useful to him, and starts being a liability instead. You understand what that means? It means he dies. It means he dies fast, and quiet, and Grant loses nothing at all by it." Cobb's voice cracked, just slightly, on the last word. "Your brother's smart enough to know that. Smart enough to risk everything sending that note anyway, because he'd rather you know the truth than keep grieving a lie. But knowing and acting reckless on it are two different animals, and only one of them keeps him breathing." Wren stood in the snow a long moment. Shaking. Not from cold. "Does Tocho know?" she finally said. "Not yet. I came to you first. Then I have to tell him. Now. Tonight." Her voice steadied, slowly, into something harder than it had been a moment before. "Because if there's any hope of getting Asa out of that camp alive, it isn't going to come from me riding in alone and getting us both killed. It's going to take more than that. More than I've got by myself." Cobb studied her a long moment. Something like pride moving behind his tired eyes, buried under all the fear. Your father would have said the same thing, he said quietly. Word for word, near enough. The lodge, that night. Tocho listened without interrupting once. Which was its own kind of mercy, Wren thought later, because if he'd asked questions partway through she wasn't certain she'd have made it to the end of the telling at all. When she finished, he was quiet a long moment. The fire between them low and steady. Your brother is alive. Testing the shape of the words. And Grant has kept this from you. All this time. To use him against me, if I ever got close enough to real proof. Then he has already made his mistake. Something hard crossed his face. A man who holds a hostage believes that hostage keeps him safe. He does not understand, not until it is too late, that a hostage held too long becomes something else instead. A reason. A wound that will not close, until it is answered. I want to go to him. I know. You're going to tell me not to. No. His eyes lifted to hers. Level. I am going to tell you, that riding in alone gets you both killed, and that is not the same, as telling you not to go. It is telling you we do this together, and we do it, with more care than grief alone will allow you to hold on to. Something in Wren's chest loosened, just slightly, at that. The relief of not having to fight him on it. The relief of not being told to sit still, and wait, the way every man in her old life had always told her to do. How, she asked. How do we even begin? We begin, Tocho said slowly, by understanding that Grant wants a war more than he wants your brother dead. So long as he believes peace still holds, your brother stays useful, stays breathing. It is only, when Grant believes the peace has already failed, that your brother becomes a loose thread instead of leverage. So we can't move against him yet. Not directly. Not until we know exactly where your brother is held, how many guard him, and how fast Grant would move to silence him, if he felt cornered. His jaw tightened. This will take patience I do not think either of us has much of tonight. But it is the only path, that ends with your brother alive. Wren nodded slowly. Wiped her eyes, with the back of one hand, furious at herself for the tears even, as they kept coming. I hate this, she whispered. I hate waiting. I've done nothing, but wait since the day that wagon burned. I know. Tocho reached across the space between them. Took her hand in both of his, warm despite the cold night pressing at the lodge walls. But you have not only waited, Wren. You have survived a thing meant to break you, and found truth inside it, that a magistrate believed would stay buried forever. That is not waiting. That is war fought a different way than the one Grant expects. She let herself lean into him then. Just for a moment. Let the weight of everything she'd carried, since that burning wagon settle, finally, against someone strong enough to help hold it. We're going to get him back, she said. Half question. Half vow. Yes, Tocho said. No hesitation at all. We are. Neither of them, yet knew how soon, and how violently, Grant would force that promise to its first true test. The Harding farm, 10 days later. The Harding place sat at the valley's eastern edge. A settler family, mother, father, 3 children, a hired hand, who slept in the barn, and in 10 years of hard winters, and harder neighbors, nothing worse than a bad harvest had ever touched them. Until the night the fire came. It started in the barn. Fast, too fast, the kind of fast, that only came, from oil poured deliberate along dry timber, though nobody thinking clearly enough in the panic to notice that detail until much later. By the time the family stumbled out, into the yard in their nightclothes, the whole structure was a wall of flame against the black winter sky, and arrows, a dozen of them, more, stood driven deep, into the farmhouse door, and window frames. Apache arrows. Or arrows made to look that way. Fletched wrong, Tied off in a way no one at that farm would ever think twice to check, because why would grieving, terrified people pause mid-panic to examine the stitching on an arrow shaft? By dawn, word had already ridden hard for the fort. By midday, Magistrate Ashford Grant stood in that scorched yard himself, expression grave, voice pitched to carry to the small crowd of settlers already gathering, already afraid, already looking for somewhere to point their fear. This is exactly what I feared. Loud enough. Solemn enough. We extended a hand of peace. We gave that peace everything we had to give, even one of our own daughters, sent to seal the bargain in good faith. His eyes swept the crowd. Landed, deliberately, nowhere near anyone who might contradict him. And this is how it is answered. You don't know it was them, came one voice. Weak. Uncertain. I know the arrows in that door, Grant said. I know the fletching. I know what I have seen with my own eyes, and I will not stand here and pretend otherwise out of some misplaced hope that a peace already broken can still be saved. Nobody in that crowd thought to ask who exactly had examined those arrows first, and how quickly, and how conveniently, that examination had happened, before anyone else got close enough to look themselves. Because fear doesn't ask good questions. Fear only wants an answer fast enough to hold on to. The village, that same afternoon. Word reached the valley by nightfall. Carried, as it happened, by Mingan himself, who arrived at the council fire breathless, urgent, insisting he'd heard it, from a trader passing through, though no one thought to ask exactly which trader, or why Mingan had been anywhere near the eastern trail, that day at all. They say Apache arrows. Voice tight, with something that might have passed, to an untrained eye, for genuine alarm. In the door. In the walls. A whole family burned out in the night. The council fire went utterly silent. Wren felt the cold reach all the way down, into her stomach. That's not possible, she said. Nobody here has raided in months. Since before I even arrived. That is what I told the trader, Mingan said. Smooth. Practiced. And yet here we are. Wombley's face had gone grave, deep lines cutting harder than usual in the firelight. We must know the truth of this, before the settlers decide it for us, the old man said. If soldiers come believing our people did this. They will not wait for truth, Tocho said. Flat. Certain. Grant will make sure of that. You believe this is his doing? One of the other elders, skeptical, arms folded. An accusation with no proof, Tocho, is as dangerous as the raid itself. I have proof of nothing yet. His jaw was tight as stone. I have only a pattern. A man who profits from land no one can safely settle, so long as peace holds. A peace he has spent all winter working, quietly, to unmake. His eyes swept the circle. Ask yourselves who benefits from a burned farm, and Apache arrows conveniently left behind for everyone to find. Murmurs. Uncertain. Frightened. Mingan stepped forward then, and something in his posture, too eager, too ready, should have caught Wren's attention sooner than it did. Or, he said, voice carrying easy, over the murmurs, someone among us grew tired of watching a settler girl walk freely, through our village, while our own people starved, through a hard winter, with nothing gained, from this so-called peace. Someone acted alone. Rashly. And now the whole village pays for one man's anger. You accuse one of our own, Tocho said. Voice gone dangerously quiet. I accuse no one. Mingan's eyes glittered. I only ask that we consider every possibility. Including the ones that do not conveniently point toward a magistrate none of us can prove touched a single arrow. Wren watched the circle of faces shift. Watched doubt take root, where certainty had briefly stood, and understood, with a cold, sick clarity, exactly what Mingan had just accomplished. He hadn't defended Grant outright. He'd simply muddied the water enough, that no single truth could rise clean to the surface anymore. "This is exactly what he wants," she said. To the whole circle, though her eyes stayed fixed on Mingan's face. Confusion. Division. A village too busy accusing itself to notice the real hand behind the fire. "Careful, settler girl," Mingan said softly. "That argument cuts more than one way." The fort, 3 days later. The soldiers assembled on the 4th morning. Not many. A single company, dispatched from the fort under orders, that had moved, with unusual speed for anything involving frontier bureaucracy, which alone should have told anyone paying attention exactly how long those orders had already been sitting ready, waiting only for an excuse. Grant met the company commander at the fort himself, before the ride even began. Made certain the story reached the man's ears in exactly the shape Grant needed it to take. "Captain." Grant extended a hand. "Thank you for the speed of your response." "Magistrate." The captain, younger than Grant, weathered from years at frontier posts, didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Tell me what I'm walking into." "It's a 3-day ride to that valley." "I'd rather know what I'm marching my men toward, before we're a day gone." A peace agreement, brokered in good faith last autumn, now broken by the very people who benefited most from it. Grant's voice carried the practiced weight of a man who'd rehearsed the telling more than once. A settler family burned out. Apache arrows left behind, deliberately, I believe, as a message. And a war leader named Tocho, who took a settler bride under terms of that peace, and who I fear has grown emboldened enough to test how far the territory's patience will stretch. "You have proof it was this Tocho specifically?" "I have arrows. I have a burned farm. I have a pattern of raids, that stopped the moment we handed over a settler girl, and have now resumed the moment winter made us complacent enough to stop watching." Grant's eyes were cold, certain. "I would rather you demand proof of his innocence than wait for the next family to burn, while we debate the finer points of who exactly loosed which arrow." The captain was quiet a moment. Turning it over. "What would you have me do, magistrate?" "Ride to that village," Grant said. "Simple. Final. Demand Tocho answer for it. If he is innocent, as his people will surely claim, let him prove it plainly, before witnesses, and this ends, without further bloodshed." A pause, calculated to the second. "But if he refuses? If his people close ranks, and shelter him, from justice, then I fear the choice of what happens next will no longer rest, with either of us." The captain nodded slowly. Turned to his men. And from a fort 200 miles, from the mining camp, where a boy still sat chained in a supply shed, an army that believed itself righteous began riding, at last, toward a valley, that had no idea how completely the trap around it had already closed. Silas Cobb attached himself to that same company the morning it rode out. Told the quartermaster he was scouting the eastern trail for the army's own benefit, which was, strictly speaking, not entirely a lie, and rode near the rear of the column for 3 long days, watching, waiting, saying nothing that didn't need saying. The village, 3 days later. The soldiers came into view along the eastern ridge just past midday on the 3rd day, the same span of trail Wren had ridden herself, months before, terrified and alone, and certain her old life was ending. It was ending again. Differently this time. "They will demand I answer for something I did not do." Tocho, beside her, watching the column descend, his voice tight but controlled. "And if I cannot answer to their satisfaction? Don't." Wren's hand found his arm. Gripped hard. "Don't finish that sentence. It needs finishing, Wren. Better between us now than left unspoken, and true later." His eyes stayed fixed on the approaching soldiers. "If they take me, the village may still stand. If they burn the village looking for proof they will not find, because there is none to find, that is a wound this valley does not survive. Then we give them proof," Wren said. Fierce. Desperate. Real proof. Grant's proof. The burned document, Cobb's account of the arrows, everything. We have pieces. Gently. Not the whole. And a captain riding in already primed by Grant's story will not stop to weigh pieces against a magistrate's certainty, not today, not with soldiers at his back, and orders already given. The column kept coming. Closer now. Close enough to make out individual riders, individual faces set grim beneath winter coats, and somewhere among them, though Wren couldn't see him yet, Silas Cobb rode near the rear. Wombley came to stand beside them. Old face carved deep, with the weight of decisions no elder should ever have to make so fast. They will ask for him, the old man said quietly. And the council must decide, before that asking comes, what this village is prepared to do. Give them the truth, Wren said. Truth is not always what stops an army already marching, Wombley said. Not unkind. Simply honest, in the way winter itself was honest, indifferent to what anyone wished were true instead. We must decide what we protect first. The man. Or the peace. Because today, child, I do not believe we get to keep both. The column crested the last rise above the village. Behind them, unseen, unheard, in a mining camp half a day's hard ride to the north, a young man named Asa Calloway sat chained to a support beam in a dark supply shed, listening to a guard outside laugh about news just arrived by Ryder, a burned farm, Apache arrows, an army finally marching, and felt something in his chest go cold, and still, because he understood, better than almost anyone alive, exactly whose hand had truly lit that fire. And in the valley below, as the first soldiers reined up at the edge of the village clearing, and a captain's voice rang out demanding the war leader called Tocho show himself, Wren Calloway stood in the snow beside the man she had come, slowly and against every fear she'd carried west, to love, and understood that everything Grant had built, every quiet lie stacked, upon quiet lie, since the night her father's wagon burned, had finally arrived at the one moment meant to bring it all down. Around them both. Stay behind me, Tocho said. Low. Level, even now. No, Wren said. And stepped forward instead, level with him, close enough that, when the captain's eyes finally found them both standing together in the trampled snow, there could be no mistaking which side of this she had chosen, and would go on choosing, whatever the coming hours demanded of her. The captain dismounted. Walked forward alone, hand resting near his sidearm, eyes hard beneath his winter cap. Tocho. Flat. Final. By order of Magistrate Ashford Grant, and the authority of this territory, you are to answer for the burning of the Harding farm, and the deaths within it. Come forward now, peaceably, or this valley answers for you instead. The wind picked up. Carried snow in a hard sideways sweep across the clearing, across soldiers and villagers alike, and for one long suspended moment nobody moved at all, the whole valley holding its breath together, waiting to see which way the winter, and the war building inside it, would finally break. Nobody moved. Because nobody dared to. The captain's hand still resting near his sidearm. Tocho standing level in the trampled snow, Wren beside him, close enough their shoulders nearly touched. And behind them the whole village gone silent, no children's voices, no dogs barking, nothing but wind, and the low creak of frozen branches somewhere past the tree line. I am not going to ask twice, the captain said. Then you will have to, Wren said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Which surprised her some. Because inside, everything was shaking, hands, breath, the whole trembling architecture of a girl who'd buried a father, married a stranger, and now stood between, that stranger and an army, with orders already written. The captain's eyes shifted to her. Cold. Assessing. You're the Calloway girl. I am. Then you understand what's at stake here better than most. A family burned. Arrows left behind. And a war leader who didn't do it. You have proof of that? Wren's mouth went dry. Because she didn't. Not proof enough to satisfy a captain, with soldiers at his back, and orders already given. Pieces, Tocho had called it the night before. Pieces, not the whole. Except right then, from the tree line at the edge of the clearing, a rider broke, through at a hard gallop. Snow flying up behind his horse in a white wake, and Wren's chest seized, when she recognized the gray mare first, the man second. Silas Cobb. Captain. Cobb's voice tore, through the cold air, before he'd even reined up fully. Captain, hold your men. Hold them right there. The captain turned. Irritation flickering across his weathered face. Mr. Cobb. This isn't your jurisdiction. Neither is a burned document sitting in Magistrate Grant's private desk drawer. Breathless, half-frozen, swinging down off his horse, before it had fully stopped. Which I have seen. With my own eyes. That's a serious accusation. So is marching an army on a man for a crime somebody else committed to cover his own tracks. Cobb's hands were shaking, though whether from cold, or fury Wren couldn't tell. Captain. Give me a day. One day, before you do anything this valley can't take back. I have something you need to see, and something I need to go get. The captain's jaw worked. Weighing it. Behind him his men sat their horses, breath clouding in the cold, waiting on a word. One day, the captain finally said. My men camp here overnight, and if what you bring me doesn't hold up by tomorrow's light, Mr. Cobb, I will hold you personally responsible for the delay, and I will finish what I rode here to finish. Fair enough, Cobb said. Then his eyes found Wren's across the clearing, and something in his expression shifted, softened, carried a weight she recognized instantly, because she'd been waiting for it, in some buried corner of herself, for weeks. Wren, he said quietly. There's more. I need you to hear the rest of it. All of it. Right now. The council lodge, minutes later. Inside, away from soldiers, and snow, Cobb laid it all out. Fast. Urgent. The words tumbling over each other like a man who'd been carrying them too long, and needed, finally, to set the weight down. Your brother, he said. Asa. He's alive, Wren. Being held at Grant's mining camp, north of here, has been since the fire took your father. Grant's kept him, as leverage this whole winter, in case you ever got close enough to real proof to matter. Wren's whole body went cold. You told me this already. There's more now. Cobb pulled a folded paper, from inside his coat. Worn soft from handling, edges gone gray with travel. A second note. Came a week back, same boy who carried the first. Your brother's been keeping his own eyes open in that camp. Listening. And he found something. He handed her the paper. Wren unfolded it with shaking hands. Sister. Grant keeps a ledger locked in his mining office. Payments. Names. Land claims bought under false owners, all bordering our father's grant. And a payment, dated the week before the fire, to a man named Voss for clearing the eastern road. Our father wasn't killed by any raiding party. He was killed, because he found this ledger first, and refused Grant's offer to buy his silence along with his land. I heard the guard say as much, drunk one night, thinking I couldn't understand enough to matter. I understand plenty. Get this to Cobb. Get it to someone who can use it, before Grant realizes I know. The paper trembled in her hands. Because there it was. The whole shape of it, finally, laid out plain as daylight. Not a raid gone wrong. Not some tragic accident of frontier violence. A murder. Planned. Paid for. Her father dead in a burning wagon, because he'd found out exactly what Grant was building, and refused to look away from it. The way she wouldn't look away either. He knew, she whispered. My father knew. Before any of us. And it got him killed. It did. Cobb's voice was gentle now. Careful. Which is why we can't waste this day arguing with a captain, Wren. We need that ledger. Physical proof, in Grant's own hand, tying him to the fire, and to your father's death both. Without it, all we've got is your brother's word, from inside a mining camp, and a burned scrap of paper, that proves a seal existed, not what it was used for. The ledger's in the mining office. Which means someone has to get inside. Wren's mind was already racing ahead, faster than her fear could catch up to stop her. Where Asa's being held. Wren. I'm going. That is exactly the reckless thing your brother begged me to keep you from doing. He begged you to keep me from riding in alone, and getting killed, Wren said. Fierce now, something hard and clear settling into her voice, that hadn't been there before this whole long winter. I'm not asking to go alone. She turned. Found Tocho's eyes across the lodge, steady even now, even with soldiers camped at the village edge, and a single day's mercy already ticking down toward its end. You said we do this together, she said. I'm asking you to mean it. Something moved behind his eyes. Grief, maybe, at the danger of it. Pride, too, buried beneath. I meant it, he said simply. The camp's half a day's hard ride. Cobb was already pulling his gloves back on. We go tonight, we're there well before midnight. Get in, get what we need, get out before the guards change at dawn. We push the horses hard both ways, we're back inside the captain's window, with hours to spare. And if we're not? Then we ask the captain for what mercy's left in him, Cobb said grimly, and I don't much like our odds on that count. The North Trail, that night. They rode fast, 3 horses cutting hard along a trail Cobb knew well, from years scouting this territory, snow flying up behind them in the dark, while behind them at the village, Wombley's doing a final act of quiet defiance against Mingan's louder caution. Word reached the captain that Tocho had ridden out to gather the very proof the captain himself had granted a day to find. By the time the mining camp's low buildings finally hunched into view against the snow, the horses were blowing hard, lathered despite the cold, and Wren understood, with a fresh stab of fear, that there would be no pushing them much harder than this on the ride back either. One lit window burned yellow in the office structure set apart from the rest. Beyond it, half hidden behind a supply shed, a scrap of movement, that might have been a guard changing his watch, or might have been nothing at all. 2 guards, Cobb whispered. Counting from the tree line, where they'd left the horses to blow and cool. Maybe 3. Office is lit, someone's working late, or Grant left a man posted inside. Asa, Wren breathed. Where would they keep him? Supply shed, Cobb said. That's my guess. Small building, back corner, no windows I can see from here. A man doesn't build a prison out of a room folks walk past regular. Tocho's hand found Wren's shoulder. Level even now. You go for your brother, he said. Low. Cobb and I take the office. The ledger first, Wren, without it, freeing Asa saves 1 life, and changes nothing else. Grant walks free either way. I'm not leaving him chained in there, while I wait on paperwork. You are not waiting, Tocho said. You are going straight to him. I only ask, that the moment you have him free, you come find us at that office window, and not a moment before, because if a guard raises alarm, before we have that ledger in hand, none of us leave this camp alive tonight, your brother included. Wren's jaw tightened. But she nodded. Because he wasn't wrong. And because some small, terrified, practical part of her, the part her father had raised, the part that had learned to survive a wagon fire, and a stranger's lodge, and a whole winter of grief, understood exactly how thin the margin was, that they were all standing on. Be careful, she whispered. Always, Tocho said. Which wasn't quite true, not that winter, but she let herself believe it anyway, just for the length of one held breath, before they split apart, into the dark. The supply shed. The door wasn't locked, from outside so much as barred. A heavy wooden beam dropped across two iron brackets, quiet enough to lift, if a person moved slow and careful and didn't let the wood scrape. Wren moved slow. Careful. Inside, the dark was near total. A single shape slumped against the far support beam, chain looped once around an ankle, and for one horrible frozen second Wren's heart stopped entirely, because the shape didn't move at all. Asa. Nothing. Asa. The shape stirred. Lifted its head. And even in the near dark she knew him instantly, thinner than she remembered, beard grown rough and untended, but the eyes, when they found hers, were exactly the eyes she'd grown up beside her whole life. Wren. His voice cracked on her name like something breaking apart, and putting itself back together in the same breath. You shouldn't be here. I told Cobb. I know what you told him. She was already at the chain, fingers working at the lock, with a hairpin Sora had taught her to use for exactly this kind of desperate improvisation, months back, in a lesson that had felt like a game at the time. I didn't listen. Family trait, apparently. Something that might have been a laugh, cracked and disbelieving, escaped him. You look different, he said. As the lock finally gave, as the chain fell away from his ankle. Older. Harder, maybe. A lot's happened. I heard some of it. Guards talk when they think the prisoner's just furniture. His hand found her shoulder, gripping hard, like he needed to prove to himself she was solid, and real, and actually there. You married him. The war leader. Tocho. Good man. The best I've known, Wren said. And meant it, fully, without a single flicker of doubt behind the words. Asa nodded slowly. Rose on legs gone weak, from weeks of chain and confinement, leaning hard on her shoulder for the first unsteady steps. Then let's go prove it, he said. Let's go make sure the world knows exactly what kind of man burned our father alive to steal a valley. The mining office, same time. The lit window belonged to a single guard, dozing more than working, boots up on Grant's own desk, and Cobb dealt with him quick and quiet the way a man deals with things when quiet is the only option that keeps everyone breathing. Tocho searched the desk, while Cobb kept watch at the door. Drawers. Locked, mostly, until a letter opener, from the desk itself made short work of the weaker ones, and there, beneath false-bottomed papers about supply orders and payroll, a leather-bound ledger, heavier than it looked, pages dense with names and figures and dates, that told, in cold columns of ink, the entire shape of Grant's scheme laid bare. Land claims. Purchased under false names, every one bordering the original Calloway grant. Payments. To men whose names meant nothing to Tocho, until his eyes caught on one line near the bottom of a page dated 2 days before the fire. Voss. Road clearing, Eastern Trail. $200. The same name from Asa's smuggled note. The same amount, that would buy a man's silence, or his willingness to do something far worse than silence required. We have it, Tocho breathed. The door opened behind him. Not Cobb. Not Wren. Mingan. Every muscle in Tocho's body went still. You, he said. Low. Disbelieving despite everything the winter had already taught him to expect. Mingan stood in the doorway, rifle loose but ready in his hands, eyes moving between Tocho, the ledger, and Cobb slumped against the wall, where the guard's unconscious weight had left him watching the hallway instead of the room. I followed the trail, from the village, Mingan said. Thought I might find something useful out here. Did not expect quite this useful. You work for him. Tocho's voice was flat, with a fury he'd rarely let himself feel so completely. All this time. The council fire. Your accusations against Wren. All of it was Grant's design, and you carried it willingly. I carried what served me. Unashamed. You had everything, Tocho. The council's trust. A wife who looked at you the way women look at men worth dying for. I had nothing, but watching it, from the edges. His jaw tightened. Grant offered me your place. All I had to do was let him take it, from you instead. And now? Now you hold proof that ends him. Something flickered behind his eyes, regret, maybe, arriving too late to matter. Which means it ends me too, the moment that ledger reaches anyone, who can read it. His finger moved toward the trigger. The door slammed open behind him. Wren. Asa leaning heavy on her shoulder, barely upright, and in her free hand, Wren herself would never afterward be entirely certain how she'd thought to grab it on the way, through the outer room, a heavy iron lantern hook, swung hard and fast, and utterly without hesitation, into the back of Mingan's skull. He dropped. The rifle clattered across the floorboards, unfired. For a moment nobody in that room breathed at all. Then Tocho was moving, kicking the rifle clear, checking Mingan's pulse, with 2 fingers pressed hard against his throat, alive, unconscious, but alive, because whatever Mingan had become, that winter, Tocho would not let this night make him a killer twice over. Wren. His eyes found hers across the chaos. Found the lantern hook still clutched in her white-knuckled fist. Are you hurt? No. Her voice shook. Asa. I'm alive, her brother managed. Weak, but grinning despite everything. Thanks to my sister's apparently excellent aim. Cobb groaned back to consciousness against the wall, one hand pressed to a rising bruise along his temple. Someone, he mumbled, is going to have to explain to me later how exactly that went. Tocho held up the ledger. Heavy. Damning. Every page a nail in the coffin of everything Grant had built across a long, quiet, murderous winter. Later, he said. For now, we ride. Hard. We haven't much of the night left, and less of the captain's patience. The village clearing, dawn. The horses were spent by the time the tree line broke open, into the clearing, lathered white with sweat, that steamed in the cold morning air, but they made it, just as the first gray light was climbing the eastern ridge, just as the captain's men were beginning to stir, from a night camped uneasy at the village edge. Wren half expected to find soldiers already moving, already following whatever orders Grant had left waiting in case his day of mercy expired unanswered. Instead she found the clearing still. Waiting. The captain himself standing near the council fire, arms folded, patience worn thin, but not yet broken, and beside him, unexpected, upright, alive in a way Wren hadn't dared hope for, Helona and Wombley stood together, having held the whole fragile peace, through sheer force of dignity, while the night ran its course. Captain. Cobb swung down first, exhaustion and triumph fighting for space across his weathered face. We have what you asked for. And considerably more than that. The ledger changed hands. The captain read. Slowly at first, then faster, his jaw tightening page by page, as the whole architecture of Grant's scheme unfolded itself in cold, undeniable ink, the false land claims, the payment to a man named Voss dated 2 days, before a wagon fire, that had been called, at the time, an accident of frontier violence. This is, the captain's voice had gone hoarse. This implicates the magistrate directly. In a settler's murder. Josiah Calloway. Wren stepped forward, her brother still leaning on her shoulder, alive and breathing, and proof enough on his own, that Grant's story had been built on nothing, but convenient lies. My father. Killed because he found this ledger, before Grant meant him to. Not by any raiding party. By a man Grant paid $200 to clear him off land Grant wanted for himself. The captain looked between the ledger, the girl, and the thin exhausted young man beside her, who had, by every official account, burned to death 2 months prior. And the Harding farm, the captain said slowly. The arrows. Ask yourself who benefits, from a burned family, and Apache arrows conveniently left behind. Tocho, echoing, deliberately, the very words he'd spoken at the council fire days before. You have already begun asking that question yourself, Captain. I can see it plain enough. The captain was quiet a long moment. Around them the whole village had gathered now, drawn by dawn light and rising tension, and beyond them his own soldiers sat their horses in uneasy silence, waiting on a word that hadn't come yet. I need this taken before proper authority. Finally. Territory governor. A judge, if we can find one honest enough out here to matter. His eyes hardened. And I need Magistrate Grant brought in to answer for it. Personally. He'll run, Cobb warned. Man like that doesn't stand still for judgment he knows is coming. Then we don't give him the warning to run, the captain said. The trading post, that afternoon. Grant was still at his desk, when the soldiers came, through the door. Still believing, right up until the moment the captain stepped inside, with the ledger held out plain in one hand, that his day of quiet management had worked exactly, as every previous hour of his careful, patient scheming had worked before it. Captain. He rose, smooth as ever, reaching for the same practiced warmth he'd used on Wren, so many weeks before. I trust you found what you needed at that village. I trust the war leader has finally been made to answer. He has answered, the captain said. Rather thoroughly. He set the ledger on the desk between them. Grant's eyes dropped to it. And for the first time, since Wren had met him, something behind his composed, well-practiced face genuinely, visibly cracked. Where did you? Your mining office, the captain said. Along with a prisoner you were holding there. Asa Calloway. Alive, Magistrate, which I understand comes, as something of a surprise to you. Grant's mouth opened. Closed. The color draining slowly, from his face, as the full weight of it settled, over him, every careful lie, every quiet payment, every arrow fletched wrong, and every farm burned deliberate, all of it laid bare now in his own handwriting, in a ledger he'd never once imagined leaving, that locked office alive. I can explain, he said. Weakly. The first weak thing Wren had ever heard him say. You'll have every opportunity, the captain said. Before a judge. Under oath. He nodded to two of his men, who stepped forward, and took Grant firmly by each arm. I'd suggest you begin composing that explanation now, Magistrate. You're going to need it to be very, very good. Grant's eyes found Wren then, standing near the doorway beside her brother, and Tocho both, and for one long moment something raw and ugly moved across his face, not quite fear, not quite hatred, something closer to the particular fury of a man who has spent his whole life believing himself smarter than everyone in the room, only to discover, too late, exactly how wrong he'd been. You should have taken the trade quietly, he said to her. Low. Bitter. You should have simply survived, the way I told you to. I did survive, Wren said. Steady, finally, all the way through. I just didn't do it quietly. They led him out into the cold. The village, 1 week later. Winter hadn't broken yet. Not fully. But something in the air had shifted regardless, a softness at the edges of the wind, a lengthening of daylight, the first thin promise of a thaw still weeks off, but no longer impossible to imagine. Grant's trial would happen east, before the territory's governor, months from now most likely, given how slow such things moved out here. But the ledger traveled, with the captain's own testimony, and Asa's account, and Cobb's steady corroboration of every piece, enough, the captain had assured them, before riding out, to see real judgment finally reach a man who'd believed himself untouchable. Mingan they exiled. Not killed, Tocho had insisted on that, over the sharp objections of elders, who argued he deserved worse, arguing instead that a man who'd chosen greed, over loyalty deserved to live long enough to understand fully what that choice had cost him. He rode east, before the week was out, and no one in that valley ever spoke his name again, with anything but quiet, careful silence. Wombly called council one final time that week. Not for judgment. For something else entirely. This village stood at the edge of war, the old man said, before the whole gathered community, fire crackling warm against the cold evening air. Twice, in one winter. And twice, it did not fall, not because of soldiers, not because of luck, but because a settler's daughter refused to look away from a truth that would have been far easier, and far safer, to leave buried. His eyes found Wren across the fire. "You came to us a stranger," Wombly said. "Traded, not chosen. And you leave this council no longer a stranger at all, but something this village will remember for generations, after every one of us gathered here tonight has gone to join our ancestors." Helona rose then. Crossed to where Wren stood, and pressed something small, and worn into her palm, the same beaded loop she'd offered, so many months before, the first true doorway, into a life Wren hadn't known, yet how to want. "You sat in the circle," Helona said. "You did not stay silent long enough to let your heart dry. That is the only test that ever mattered, child. You have already passed it, many times over." The lodge, that night. The fire burned low and steady. Outside, for the first time in weeks, the wind had gone gentle, carrying just the faintest edge of something warmer riding underneath the cold. Tocho knelt before her. The same way he had, that very first terrible night, months ago, when she'd sat frozen on the edge of a stranger's bed, with her whole world burned down around her, and no earthly reason left to trust the man kneeling in front of her. He untied her shoes. Slow. Careful. The same worn deerskin ones his sister's sister had stitched, with beaded sunbursts, carried against his own chest, through a snowstorm to keep them dry for her feet alone. He washed them. Not to cleanse anything, this time. Not out of duty, or ceremony, or the careful uncertain kindness of two strangers learning how to survive each other. Only to honor what they'd built. Together. Through fire and fear, and a whole long brutal winter neither of them had chosen, but both of them, in the end, had chosen to fight, through side by side. Wren watched him. Felt something settle in her chest, that had been circling, unmoored, since the moment a wagon will first caught on rock, and tipped her whole life sideways into smoke. She reached down. Cupped his face in both hands, the way she'd learned, slowly, that whole winter, how to reach for things instead of flinching from them. "I see you," she whispered. He looked up. Something bright and unguarded moving behind his eyes, the same eyes, that had found her face, and only her face, that very first terrible night, and never once looked away since. "And I see you," he said. Outside, past the lodge walls, past the sleeping village, and the dark tree line beyond it, the first true whisper of thaw moved quiet, through the valley, ice beginning, somewhere far off along the river, its long slow work of breaking open toward spring. Neither of them heard it yet. But it was coming. The way spring always comes, eventually, to valleys that have survived their hardest winter. And in that lodge, with the fire burning low, and steady between them, Wren Calloway understood at last the thing she'd been too frightened to believe on the night she first arrived here, grieving, traded, certain she was nothing, but a bargain paid to keep a fragile peace. She had not been given away. She had been found.